Hi, we're back. I'm Brandon.
And Mom, thank you for joining us again today.
Yeah, I am very excited for us to get into another TV discussion. And Mom, what show are we speaking about here today? And hope you're doing well.
I'm doing fine, and today we're going to talk about A Man.
Yeah, so this is the pilot episode of the series from September 27th of 1986. And Mom, I want to go ahead and dive right into this discussion. And so overall, tell us a little bit about the series.
All right, just in general, A Man is the show that it shows the behind the scenes actions of a church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Specifically, the lives of the Reverend and the head deacon and his daughter are explored in depth within the series.
Yes, and so this all takes place within the fictional First Community Church, there in Philadelphia, and and overall, this first episode, the pilot episode, I think is very much a pilot episode.
It is very much a pilot episode. They do a lot of introductions. There is a beginning, a true beginning to the show, and it's just kind of a typical pilot episode.
Yeah, and oftentimes, as we observe with true pilot episodes, unlike traditional series premieres, are that oftentimes the story is pretty self-contained. It teases a little bit what you can expect from each of the major characters, and sometimes there are things that are changed later in the series. And so in this case, we actually have three different main characters that are featured within this episode that are not featured in the rest of the series.
Yep, that is very true. And quite honest, and when you look at the episode, only one of them stands out as someone who would be, to me, a character that might have continued a little later. And I know he did continue for a few episodes, but the other two, you would never know that they were considered main characters in the series.
Yeah, and so for context, we watched this episode about 3 or 4 times, in preparation for doing this discussion, and I think it wasn't until our most recent view that we actually were able to figure out who these characters are, because I mean weren't ones that really stood out to us per se, but yet one of the characters that did stand out was someone that was not a main character in this episode, but was for the rest of the series.
Yep, and for those who are very familiar with the show, that was Raleigh Forbes. He, I think, stood out. He had a presence about him, unlike the other two, and so he stood out immensely in this particular episode.
Definitely. And of course, we always encourage you to watch these episodes with us. And so we are watching, for free on the platform Tubi, here in the United States. But I really think that this episode was, just an interesting start to it. So oftentimes for pilot episodes and series premieres, we have some sort of initiating event. And so in this case, it was, the church council and Deacon Fry, the main character of the series, hiring the new reverend for the church, that being Reverend Dr. Reuben Gregory.
Yes. And that was, like you said, the start of it, and and we got to see the behind the scenes part of how they chose this particular minister and why they actually were in need of a minister, because they do show the old minister in this particular episode, too.
Yeah, and I will say that, I mean, through all of that it definitely shows, Deacon Fry, I think, in such an interesting light. And overall, what do you think of Deacon Fry as a person from both this episode and the series as a whole?
Well, just so the audience does know, we have both you and I have seen, I think, just about every episode of A Man. Not recently, but we have seen every episode. And so Deacon Fry kind of stands out, of course, because he does have such a dynamic personality. And I believe what stands out most is his interaction between all the characters. Specifically, he has a daughter in the show, and his interaction with his daughter, it really stands out, and the difference between how he acts with his daughter and how he acts with the Reverend. Reverend. And that's one of the things when I looked at things that I thought were really important about watching the show. Some of the themes I thought about, if you compare, would be the interaction that he had with his daughter, his interactions that he had with actually the congregation itself, and then the interaction that he has with the Reverend. And then it goes a little further because he's a lawyer, and that comes out not necessarily in this episode, but in future episodes.
Yeah, and I think something interesting about this too, and as mentioned in passing in this episode, is that as Deacon Fry mentions, he was born in this church, his father founded the church, and you are never getting him out of the church. You might as well just accept that right then and there. But he truly believes that he's sort of entitled to the church. But at the same time, he's also a pretty shady person.
Yeah, he's a pretty shady person, but a nice shady person. And you could tell that he has quite a bit of power within a church because if he apparently has the power to fire and to hire and all sorts of things. So yes, so he is a powerful person in this particular church. But it was nice to actually see him interacting with those other people who are part of the, per se, the committee or the, like I said, the behind the scenes group that kind of do a lot of the church function, works with the church functions.
Yeah, definitely, and yeah, and that's one of the things too is that when Reverend Gregory is hired, Deacon Fry says, "Well, that my board has the power to remove you from this," and he's like, "Well, I simply don't accept that, and I'm going to do what I do because it's the right thing to do, and yeah, I'm going to follow God's work." And it's like, and I think Deacon Fry even remarks like, "Well, that's a one-sided view of religion."
Yeah, he did. And then we also learned kind of some other things about the deacon also. And we're going to the reverend too, but we learned that the deacon is single, which comes into play a little later. And then we also learned that, well, and like I said, mentioned before, that he controls much of the church functions. But the reverend itself, even which is interesting for this particular episode to be about the reverend coming into the church, we don't learn that much about him. We do learn about his education. We learn that he is a man of God because the deacon did ask him about that. Um, but we don't know much about the reverend himself. And that's something that's explored much later in the series.
Yeah, I think that's something so interesting. And speaking of the dynamic between the Reverend and the Deacon, is that if you go through the credits, actually, is that the two main stars are actually mentioned as the both of them, with everyone else being, I believe, also starring. Mom, as we're closing out this discussion, is there anything else that you wanted to discuss? Oh, and what are your thoughts about the theme song?
Oh, I'm glad you brought this up, Brandon, because this is something I thought was really interesting. So, of course, I love the theme song. Always has have sung this and love the song. However, when we watched this, this was really interesting because the people were going through the theme song, they continued through the first episode. So, as you watch the scene go through, um, you see Deacon Fry as he is walking into the church, and you see the outfit that he has on. Well, it continues. So it really is kind of like the first, that truly is like the first episode goes all the way through with the theme song. And so it was so nice to see that they had some continuity there. They showed him getting out of the car. They showed him playful, with the children and everything like that. And then to see him go straight into the church and it was just kind of nice to see. What were your thoughts, Brandon?
Yeah, that definitely was. I mean, well, first of all, of course, I always really enjoy, the theme song and the series. I think it's just very fitting, and and a little bit of a nod too, because of course the series is titled "Amen," and the song "Amen," which is not the theme song, is sung by Jester Harrison, who portrays Raleigh in the series.
Yes, and that came out in a much, much later episode. Of course, not exactly like you said, the theme song, Amen, but another song called Amen, that is sung by him. So yes, very nice nod.
Yes, but the title of this theme song, of course, is "Shine on Me," and yeah, I mean, I think it's just such a great opening to to the episode, the series as a whole, And but speaking of Raleigh, though, what are your thoughts about Raleigh as a character?
Absolutely loved him. Like I said, as we talked about before, he is kind of a standout character, even though not credited, or I should say, not as a major role per se in the first episode. But then later on, of course, he's in one of the main characters listed in the first episode. It was Raleigh's presence stood out when he was in the meeting with the deacons and the Hedgebrick sisters when they were looking for as they were voting on on the new reverend. He was funny, and I'm so glad they made him a series regular.
Yes, definitely. And yeah, and speaking of that, and rounding out the rest of the cast, of course, we have the Hedderbrink sisters, two of the other church board members, and then of course we have, of course, and then you have, of course, Deacon Fry's daughter Velma, rounding out the cast throughout the series. And so, Mom, overall, like, what are your thoughts about like the dynamic of these characters? Because I think they just all work really well together, and really, I don't know, it feels very authentic to me.
I thought it felt very authentic too, and I like that they for this opening episode that even though all of them are introduced, you know a little bit about them, but they don't go into full-fledged details. And so Thelma's a very interesting character, and she's one to watch in the later parts of the series as people if people do continue to watch forward, because they explore a little bit of her. But Thelma's just an interesting character altogether, and she brings and her relationship with her father is really fun to watch. And then later, of course, her relationship with the Reverend is fun to watch too. Oh, I'm sorry, Brandon. Forgot about the Hedderbrick sisters. Oh, yeah. They were, the Hedderbrick sisters are interesting because they play off each other really well. They're two members of the church who are just almost joined at the hip. And but they're able to finish each other's sentences. They are showing that they are sisters of the church. They are sisters them of course sisters themselves too. And so watching them kind of get along with everyone and how they work with the reverend, and then of course how they tease and give the deacon a hard time is a really nice dynamic. And then they play really well with Thelma also whenever they are able to have scenes together.
Yeah, and speaking of Velma, though, what's interesting is that this episode does not really portray Velma as really being a part of the church per se. And of course, while watching the series, of course, we know that she is a part of the church and later, I believe, a part of the board in some capacity or another. But but for all the scenes involving the church, the only association she seems to have here is when she goes to her daddy to complain.
Yeah, and even at the end, it's kind of they kind of allude to the fact that she hadn't really been to the church for a little bit because she had not even met the Reverend yet. And if I think it was that Sunday, so she hadn't met him yet.
Yeah, especially considering that when it had the Reverend coming back to his quarters, it had seemed that he had just finished a whole meet and greet. So so it definitely does make you question. It's like, is the Reverend the reason that she started attending church again?
Yeah, yeah, especially for someone who would have grown up in the church with her dad growing up in the church too.
Yeah, with her, I believe, I guess, grandpa being the founder of said church.
So church, yeah, very very true.
But
Yeah.
but I will say too that I think one of the reasons that this show feels very authentic is because a lot of the people involved with it actually are involved in a church in some capacity or another. For instance, the actor that plays Reverend Gregory, and of course, the actor that plays Raleigh.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's true. Um, like I said, for the audience who hasn't seen it, it's just I would just suggest for people to watch the episodes of Amen because it is a fun show to watch. It is very relaxing, and I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I certainly believe you will definitely, of course, watch it with us, and definitely comment about your favorite part of the episodes. And of course, this series was produced by Carson Productions of the Tonight Show host Johnny Carson.
Oh, that's very interesting. I know we talked about that earlier, and I was surprised to find that out.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure, of course, to the extent of his involvement per se, but I definitely found that, I mean, quite interesting. But, Mom, before we go ahead and close this out, I did want to ask, though, what are your thoughts of the character of, Deacon Fry versus the actor's previous role of George Jefferson on The Jeffersons?
Well, they have the same walk, but it is a difference. It is a difference. Whereas George, of course, was a family man, but to see him play the deacon in this type of character and show that he is someone who the behind the scenes of the church, I think is such a difference um, in portrayal of acting. And but yet there's so many things that he kept the same, like I mentioned, the walk, the way he's got the smart attitude. Those things kind of stayed the same, but for character wise, it was to me it was a complete difference, and I thought he was effective in both roles.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, well, Mom, it's always great discussing this with you, and I'm just so excited for us to continue watching more episodes of Amen, and even more first episodes to come.
Yep, I am too, Brandon. Let's say, audience, will let us know. Are there any first pilot episodes that you want us to look at? Let us know.
Yeah, and we're always excited to view them. Well, Mom, I can't wait for even more discussions to come, and I look forward to the next one.
Same here. I hope everyone has a great day.
And we'll see you next time.
All right, bye bye.